Hello everyone, thank you for tuning in again. I am Katie Batesman, the Content Director at She Can Code, and in today's episode we're discussing the importance of having female role models. Now, you can't be what you can't see. Studies have shown that having role models within STEM is an incredibly effective way to encourage women into the sector, inspire them to be more ambitious and show them what is possible. But with the lack of female representation in tech, where can women and girls find role models, and how do we encourage those already in the sector to share their stories? To delve into this further, I have the amazing Sue-Ellen Wright, Managing Director of Aerospace, Defence and National Security at Sopra Steria, with me today. Thank you so much for coming on board and having a chat with us today. Can we kick off with a little bit about yourself and your background, please?
Absolutely. So you may have noticed my accent. I grew up in Australia and left school on a scholarship to the Australian Defence Force Academy. So I joined the Royal Australian Air Force and did my uni degree in officer training at the same time. For the first 11 years of my career, I was wearing a uniform in a variety of fantastic roles all across Australia. And I had a degree in economics and management and information systems, and had recently completed an MBA in strategy and program management. And just after that, I was asked to go for an interview for a role with a global IT company. I wasn't necessarily looking to get out of the Air Force, but actually it was good timing, and I got offered a role. So actually that was an accidental but happy start to a second career for me. Since then, I moved to the UK for a short period, but that was some 23 years ago. And I've worked across public and private sectors. And 3 technology companies later, I'm back working with defence, policing and national security in this role, which I absolutely love. So that's my career so far.
Amazing. It's something that I say this regularly on our podcast, but we love to hear the roots into technology. They are all so different, which is always so encouraging to hear. You're the first I've heard that is coming from Australia. The Australian Air Force is a new one. Was there something about that? How did that happen? What encouraged you to go in that direction?
Well, I got offered a scholarship, and I'm the daughter of a coal miner and a school teacher. So the first person in my family to go to university. So actually understanding what jobs and roles were out in the market for somebody like me wasn't something that I could take for granted. And actually I knew my parents would need to work really hard and for longer than they possibly wanted to if I chose to go to university. So I moved from New South Wales up to Queensland, met a guy who was an ex-army officer, and he was saying to my parents, actually, you know, she should look at going to ADFA. It could be great for her. So I just went to some of the interviews, kept getting through to the next stage, and then no one was more surprised than me, I think, when they made me an offer. I remember them handing me a model aircraft and asking me, what are these things on the bottom of the aircraft? And I'm thinking, lights? That what, Katie, they were missiles. But anyway, these are things you can learn. I think what I had was lots of energy and enthusiasm, a little bit of an aptitude for leadership and that sort of those sorts of skills, a bit sporty, so an all-round team player. And actually, I think because they definitely teach you that to be a leader, you've first got to be a team member. And I think a lot of candidates really thought that leadership was about doing it your way and ignoring everybody else. So that kind of authentic personality and leadership probably helped me with a mother who insisted I studied every evening, which meant I had quite good academic credentials to go with it. Anyway.
Amazing. Well, it sounds like that you were surrounded by role models yourself, exactly. And you mentioned your mother there. It also sounds like, I mean, even to get into what you would call your first career, the Air Force, somebody encouraged you to do that. And as you know, we mentioned in the intro there and the title of this, you can't be what you can't see. So I'm assuming you saw that career and thought, you know what, I'm going to grab that with both hands.
Yeah, and I think it's that combination of role models in both my parents. Actually, my father's second career was as a sports coach, so he was very, very good at coaching and mentoring and being a role model for young junior people, but actually the sponsorship as well. So this senior army, or ex-army man who was saying, this is a good career for you, and I can sponsor that career for you as well as be as a sponsor, yeah. So I think that the combination of those two things was really powerful.
Yes, and I'm assuming as well when you moved to your second career, which was into technology, was there someone there as well that kind of led the way for you, and what was it about that kind of attracted you to technology?
See, you're too perceptive for words. So absolutely there was. I really wasn't intending to leave the Air Force. I could have stayed there. But the lady that interviewed me was hugely inspirational. She was fantastic. She was younger than me. And I was only 30. She was super, in fact, I wasn't even, she was super dynamic. She was incredibly professional and capable, but really likable at the same time. And I just thought, actually, I would love to work for her, with her. I mean, what a different viewpoint and perspective. I'd come from the military, which was predominantly male, everybody in uniform, and then I had this very young female dynamic lady who was interviewing me with huge amounts of flair and passion. And so she was a huge influence. I don't think I would have left, even if I were offered the role, if she hadn't have been the person that I was interviewing with, because I could see that is exactly somebody like me. I could be her. She could teach me, I've got a future. So it was really, really powerful.
Yes. So I was going to ask you next, what are the benefits of having role models? But actually, you just said that you saw somebody that you thought, you know what, I could be that person. It's kind of just having that foresight, isn't it? And thinking, you know what you do looks great. I want some of that.
I couldn't agree more. I think it's absolutely so important, because every employer now understands what they should be picturing when we're advertising. But not every employer has the ability to say, and here is somebody that can walk the talk and absolutely show you what it can look like. So we make sure that we've got a gender balanced interview panel, in particular for senior roles, but for every role if we can, so that people always get the opportunity to say, there's somebody like me that I could aspire to be within the organisation. I think that's really, really important. And I know actually, I think it was Sean in one of your previous podcasts that was talking about, the reason why women are in the minority in the tech sector isn't actually necessarily because it's a hostile sector for females.
Yeah.
We're just not choosing tech as a first career. And so it makes it even more important for us to tap into people who are looking for second careers and have got a broader understanding. But we really need those women in particular who are looking at those second careers to see other females who they think can be role models for them. So, and especially because diversity in the sector is a challenge, right? We can't necessarily change those numbers overnight. We know it might be 14%, it might be 16%, it might be 21%, depending on what subsector of technology you're looking at. If you're looking at females in technology, in defence and national security, it's even smaller. That is the 14 to 16, not the 21 kind of percent. And we know there's a resourcing crisis at exactly the same time. We can't fill the roles that we've already got. So we absolutely have to make sure that we're getting as many phenomenal applicants all across the D&I, network. So not just females, but also Black and ethnic or, other minority groups are applying. And I think there's lots of education within our own business that we need to do at the same time. I'm constantly saying to people, this isn't about replacing you. This is about filling the empty seat next to you. How do we make sure you've got a phenomenal team supporting you, or fantastic people who are peers to you? So it isn't about replacing you. It's absolutely about getting those new people in. So role models are critical, I think, for all of those reasons.
Yes, and I love the fact that you said as well, role models at all levels, because that's so important. I think a lot of companies, they go for, let's make sure we've got more women in leadership, which is absolutely, a crucial point. But to have them at all levels, I think sometimes, especially when you're quite new in a career, you can't always imagine yourself as the CIO or the CEO of the company. You need to know what's the next level? Is there somebody there that, you know, as you said, you know, looks like me, reminds me of me, and I can think, actually I could do that because of that lady that might be, you know, in middle management or the next step. Whereas sometimes you might look at somebody that's, you know, sitting up on the executive board and you think, actually, that's really unattainable for me. You know, I need somebody at the next level. And so I completely agree with you at all levels.
Yeah, yeah. And we love, you know, ambitious people coming into the organization, but they also need help and support to see how they're going to get to the next step. Because what we also don't want to do is have people try to do those roles unsupported or too early, because then they fail or they leave or they don't feel like they're succeeding, so they leave. And, you know, we definitely need those role models in place and the coaches and mentors around them so that they try when it's right and they get supported and then they stay and they are successful.
Yes, because you know what you're just saying there, you said earlier about leadership styles as well, and sometimes if you look to a leader and they're not really doing what you would do as a leader, you can try and emulate that, and it's not going to work. And like you said, you know, it's finding your own leadership style and whether or not you're ready and how you're going to approach it and being supported in that, rather than just thinking, you know, there's maybe you know, your middle management might be all male, it might be a very masculine style of leadership, and you try and take that on board yourself, and it's not going to work. You know, you need to be your authentic self.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I've seen that. We've seen females in the business who have been more male than the males, you know, and actually they're very, very challenging to work with or for. You know, even more challenging, I think, than some of the men in the industry for all the wrong reasons. So actually, I couldn't agree more. We've got to be authentic, because that's the way that we really, I guess, well, we get the most out of ourselves, but then we can help others as well.
Yes, yes. And what about, you know, we're talking about being in work and being in the workplace, but do you think having more accessible female role models will help encourage more girls into STEM, you know, into STEM subjects? You know, should we be starting earlier?
I absolutely do, 100%. And that's backed up by lots of research, isn't it? I mean, it's not just true for women either, is it? It's all marginal or minority groups, I guess, fall into this category, that what you were saying, the see it and be it kind of element. Because I don't know if you read it, but back in 2017, Microsoft did a study on women in STEM subjects and found that girls are just as interested in STEM subjects as boys are up until about the age of 16. I've got a 16-year-old daughter. It's absolutely true. I can see it. And then it starts to fall away. And two key drivers that the study uncovered that could keep them interested in STEM were positive role models and the confidence that they'd be treated equally to the men in the industry. So exactly the things that we're talking about, you know. And so we know that the girls are turned off by this image of going into STEM subjects or going into technology is gaming, shoot 'em games, you know, sitting in a dark room wearing a hoodie in front of a screen, all of that sort of thing. And it's, you know, it's a real shame because actually it's not true, is there? I mean, I think you had Jackie Vors on to one of your podcasts, and I absolutely agree with what she's saying. There is a huge and ever expanding list of roles that females can do in tech companies, you know, and we need them because we need them to help us address the female data gap, you know, the gender data gap, as well as to have hugely fulfilling careers. So I think, you know, we absolutely need to have more role models so that we keep the females in. And I think it's really, we all need to be involved in providing those role models. So it's everything from the government to the schools, media, journalism, you know, publishing, TV and cinema, because even now that we're getting really great about acknowledging the critical roles that women have played in technology through history, you still, you know, you still don't get enough of that represented. So, and where we do, like with the story of Katherine Johnson and Hidden Figures, that's really about how challenging it was and how they were undervalued and, you know, didn't get acknowledged rather than the star of the show. You know, goodness, it took over 50 years to get a female Doctor Who. Why? Why? So
exactly. If you don't see it on TV sometimes, you know, how can you encourage girls to think, yep, that's the career for me? nobody's coming to your school, you don't see it on TV.
Yeah.
What career are you going to pick?
Yeah, so your word accessible is so important, because I think it needs to be accessible, not just when they come to a job interview, because we're losing candidates and phenomenal females at all levels, you know. So I think we all need to be focused on what we can do. And I think, you know, I know PwC did a similar study to Microsoft's and found that only 22% of the respondents could actually name a famous woman in technology. And there are hundreds of them, aren't there?
Yeah.
There are literally hundreds of them. We could look at some of the phenomenal candidates from the Computer Weekly's Top Women in Tech. You know, I think it was Flavella, I think her name was, who had that fashion background, who now runs her own creative brand agency. We've got Ellen Pao in the US, who learned to code when she was 10 and is now the CEO of Reddit. There are literally hundreds of them. We've got Dame Stephanie Shirley, or Steve as we know her, who was part of the Sopra Steria group way back when, who is absolutely pioneering in terms of getting females who'd had children back into tech, and this whole organization of women who were coding and doing some phenomenal things like the black box for the Concorde. You know, and you think back to post-war, or, you know, during the war, where we had all the phenomenal females with the Enigma machines. So there are absolutely examples that we could get really excited about, but we're just not good enough at celebrating those achievements of the amazing women in tech. And I would just love to see us doing more on those lines.
Yes, I completely agree with everything you just said there. I think as well, when you're in the industry and you're involved in those women in tech groups, and you're at a company that is actively encouraging diversity, you might start to hear those things. But I moved out of not out of the tech sector, but I moved out of media and moved over to be a copywriter for a little while, and I was amazed, actually, being outside of the women in tech bubble, that things haven't changed that much, and people, like you said, you know what, they can't name female role models in tech. And when you start having conversations outside of that lovely diversity bubble that I work in, it's like, actually, those conversations, they're still not there, and there's still so much that we need to do. I think some of that as well is, I wanted to ask you a little bit about how do we encourage the women already in the industry, that they're role models, because I think that's also a problem, isn't it? A lot of ladies, they don't realise that they've got a great story to tell. And I have a lot of them that, we convinced them to come on the podcast, and then they have a fabulous story and they didn't even know. And they, that was like, oh, actually I had a nice time coming on here, sharing what I do. I'm like, yes.
Yeah, I mean, we have so Sopra Steria's got coaching cafes and mentoring programs. I think we ask for individuals to volunteer for WISE, which is Women in Science and Engineering in the UK, work with STEMette. So Speakers for Schools is another program that we work with, where, which is just phenomenal. And you get a whole heap of young people who are saying, oh my goodness, I can't do this. And then we'll talk about our own stories and realize we do actually have stories, exactly what you were saying. So I think we've just got to start doing it. We run a Tell Your Story campaign across the business, where we take vignettes. We do lots with International Women's Day and get all different speakers across, because I'm absolutely with you. I had the biggest imposter syndrome ever the first time I was asked to speak for International Women's Day, even within my own company, because I thought, what angle do they want me to come from? Are they going to try to get me to say my career has been terrible? Because it hasn't been terrible. I haven't had hideous males working with me, but actually where it's been accelerated is where I have had a sponsor or an ally, where I've made really good decisions to change, is where I have seen a fantastic role model. So your story can be really positive, but still actually highlight that, some of that was luck. Let's make sure that more fantastic talent are lucky, even if that's how we see it, and we can all contribute to those things. So yeah, we've definitely got the ability to try and tell our story more.
Yeah, and you're right, having just even sharing that you have had a great career and then it was very positive. I think sometimes that can be a misconception in tech, that, you know, there's that we had somebody on here say that we have a branding issue as a sector, and that technology can be considered quite a boring career to go into, and even just sharing what your career is like, and that it has been a very positive journey is so valuable. And, you know, if more people realize that, I love the fact, so you mentioned speakers for schools. I think that's a great initiative, because sometimes you think, oh, you know what, I'd love to do something like that, or I add something to my CV where I'm helping the younger generation. But where do I start? You don't just turn up at a school and say, can I come give a speech, and what on earth would I talk about? Whereas somebody, you know, like an initiative like Speakers for Schools really helps with that. Actually, you know, come in, this is what you can do. We'll set you up with a school, make those connections for you. And it just means that all you've got to do is turn up and tell your story.
Yeah, and there are loads of schools and charities locally that could benefit from all of our skills. We work quite closely with SINAM and the Cheltenham Science Festival, but there are literally hundreds of them all across the country.
Yes, yes. Are there any schemes or communities that you think our listeners can join to share their stories and become role models? We mentioned their Speakers for Schools. You mentioned quite a few. Are there any others?
I think they're the ones we use. I'm sure there are a load of others, but they're the ones I know about. So that Wise, Stemets, Speakers for Schools, SINAM, if you're sort of based up in and around Cheltenham. I think I'm sure there are hundreds of them.
Yes, Stemets is a fantastic organisation as well. I know I went to one of their they had a house where all the young girls go and stay over sort of their summer holiday, and they invited me once to go and see the girls and see what they were doing. And I was so inspired by these young girls that were like, come and see what we're doing, and we're creating our own business, and they're so inspiring. The Stemets, they're a wonderful organisation and very open to people helping and volunteering their time. And, you know, if we want to be a role model, they're you know, a great organisation to contact. Mentors are personal role models.
Yeah.
So what's your thought on mentoring?
Well, I think mentoring is also really important. I absolutely agree it's personal, which means there's no right or wrong way to do it either, which I think is really good. Sometimes, I guess, mentoring relationships develop organically through the working relationships you've got. But I think there's absolutely nothing wrong with seeking out a mentor within your organisation or external to it. And in fact, we absolutely do that. I've had several mentors. Predominantly male, but I have had a female mentor in the past. You know, I think, what I really love is I've currently got a reverse mentor, which is great. So she is a very cool, ambitious young female with a super bright future ahead of her. And chatting to her just does exactly what you said, Stemets did for you. You know, it reinvigorates me. It just gets me all excited again about the potential and the future, and also allows me to check in on how I'm perceived across the business, because I think it's hugely important as a senior female and a role model within the business that people feel able to give me feedback, you know, that is honest, and that I've got enough trusted relationships with the key females across the business, actually, so they can say, Sue-Ellen, I think you did you did us a bit of a disservice in, you know, with what you said there, or have you thought about talking about this? So I'm really enjoying having a reverse mentor at the minute as well. So
I love that. I haven't heard that term before, but actually you're just saying that even for somebody to give you some feedback on how you're perceived, not necessarily somebody that's going to help you get to the next part in your career, but just to work on how you're perceived at this moment in time. That's incredible to have. You know, how did you find that? How did you find that person? Did you approach them, or was it just kind of something that naturally evolved that you
Yeah, so
with
I asked her. We had we've got a women's inclusive network at work, which I absolutely love. I'm the exec sponsor of that. We've got a fantastic chair on that, and we get lots of people to come in and talk to the network about a whole host of different things. So we talk about menopause quite openly. We talk about finances sometimes. We talk about a whole host of different careers. When we first started with hybrid and remote working, we had some of the BBC journalists come in and talk to us about how you come across over video, because we weren't really used to doing that either. So got some tips about presenting, most of which I'm probably ignoring today. So, like trying to sit a bit stiller and not, nodding my head too much, but I haven't quite nailed that one yet. But even really simple things like actually just put on some lipstick, and then when you see yourself on screen, you look a bit brighter and better, and that helps with your self-confidence. So just things like that, which I found really, really interesting. But one of them was about coaching and mentoring, and they spoke about having a reverse mentor, and it really resonated with me. I thought, you can't really sit and say you're an authentic leader if you don't get that feedback or you don't really understand. So yeah, so one of the phenomenal ladies, as I said, who's not in my part of the business, she's in our government and transport business, and I just said, actually, I'd really love it if you could help me with some reverse mentoring. And she's very ambitious, but also very forthright. So I knew I was asking somebody who had the confidence to tell me if I was, if there was negative feedback, she'd have the confidence to tell me.
Yes, I suppose it's finding somebody that's going to be honest and deliver it in a way also that you can take in. As you said, what, that's great advice. So having somebody in and just talking about, how you appear on video. And I remember when we started doing, when I did interviews years ago, we were encouraged to get them on video and watch them back, because you're absolutely right. If you're not used to watching yourself on video and how you interview somebody or whatever it may be in your day job, you don't realize that you fidget, you might be tapping. I was rocking on my heels, and it's not until you see that video back and you think, oh, you know what, I never realized how I look talking to people. So great advice to have there. So you mentioned that you asked somebody to be your mentor. How do you find a mentor, though? Perhaps if you haven't got like a mentoring program internally, do you reach out to someone? It's almost slightly rude, isn't it? If you just met somebody at a networking event and you're both standing there with a drink, having just met, that's kind of strange, isn't it?
Yeah.
Hi, can you be my mentor? I suppose you have to build a rapport a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think my advice is have a think about what you want from a mentoring relationship. So it's not necessarily, oh my God, that's a phenomenal person, I want them to be my mentor. It's actually, sometimes I think this is what I'm really good at. Do I either want to get better at that, or do I want to balance out with something I'm not so good at? And then have some of those thoughts and think, well, actually, maybe that's two different mentors, one that can help me work on this and someone who can help me work on that. Or is it that really what you want is a sponsor? So somebody who's senior, who can talk positively about you in the work context or in the right environment. Because I think, that's the equivalent of the, well, we've all been to this school and he used to go to that school, therefore that guy must be really, really good. That's sponsoring, in one way, in a negative way. But actually, we need to make sure that we've got those sponsors, because every now and then opportunities come up. And if you've got a senior person on the board who says, well, actually, I think that person's fantastic, why don't you consider them? That's also important. So I think it's that understanding what you want, then have a think about who can provide it. And it's unlikely to be someone you've just met, because you won't know how that person could help you in your relationship. It could be someone you've developed a relationship with or doesn't work in your company, absolutely. And then I think it's that, have the courage to ask. And I mean, I always get that, oh, I know how busy you are, I know what your diary's like, but actually, that 1 hour sometimes of mentoring somebody, even once a month, or the half an hour having a coffee and a chat, is often the highlight of my day or my week. I really like it. So I like the fact that people ask me, could you be my mentor? It's very flattering as well. It makes you feel good about yourself. And then even if we have a conversation and I say, I don't necessarily think I'm the right mentor for you, but let me help you find one.
Yes,
I've
and I
made
love
that.
the fact
Yeah,
you just said there as well, you know what, it might be more than one
yeah.
mentor. Don't expect to find everything you need in one person. It's okay to have several, and you'll get different things from different conversations.
Yeah. And it's also a point in time. So actually you could have a mentor to get you through, I don't know, writing your strategy at work. But doesn't necessarily mean you then need that person throughout the next 12 months. So I think, it's okay to move on. It's okay to have short-term mentors or mentors for specific things, I think. So yeah, I think all of those things are important. Have the courage to ask, try out several different mentors and, see how you go.
Yes, I love that. We're almost out of time, but I've got one last question, which is very important because we've been talking about role models for this episode. Who are your role models?
So I've got lots of them. So I think I mentioned Joanna, who was this phenomenal young female who I think really helped me make the transition from the military into a civilian life. But actually, one of my great friends who I went to the Defence Force Academy with is now the Deputy Chief of the Army in Australia, and she is amazing. So a peer and a role model. Natasha is just phenomenal. My parents both were role models, both because of work ethic. But actually, my father is a genuine coach and leader. He's a very, very kind, inclusive person who's all about, making sure that you can get the most out of yourself. And he's actually as proud of people that do better than him, which I think is really important. I'd love one day for someone I'm mentoring to be my CEO. That would be fantastic. It's not a threat. So I think all of those people. And then the late Queen is just a phenomenal role model, I think, to every
Yes.
female out there about how to conduct yourself with real passion, dedication, dignity, and professionalism. So all of those people who are vastly different in personalities have been a role model at some point or continue to be, really.
Yes, I completely agree. I love everything that you said today, Sue-Ellen. I completely agree with you on every point, and I'm so pleased that you come on to chat with us today. Thank you so much for joining me to share your story and chat about your insights.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you, and to everybody listening, thank you for joining us, and we hope to see you again next time.